The National Emergency Management Agency has recorded about 33 states affected by flooding with over 300 deaths in the last 8 months. Flooding, which arguably has been damaging for Nigeria, has worsened recently due to a number of possible factors, including rapid population growth, urbanization, poor planning, urban planning, and climate change, especially in increased frequency and intensity of rainfall. While the rain may be a blessing to farmers, for some others it has become dreadful due to the wide-reaching impact it has on lives and property. Joining us via Zoom is a climate change consultant, Professor Emmanuel Oladapo. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning, TVC. Good morning, Nigerians.
Right. In the last, one would say 3 decades, the rainfalls and floodings have had alarming, threatening impacts on the lives and property of Nigerians. And one would like to know what climate change has got to do with it.
Thank you very much. The change we are talking about has to do with the extreme weather events that are producing heavier than normal rainfall within very shorter periods of time. And these are happening at a time that the whole world, not only Nigeria, is going through what we call a global warming event, in which the temperature conditions all over the world is about 2 to 3 degrees higher in some places than normal. And once the air is warmer than normal, it has the capacity to absorb a lot of water and brings it back to us in the form of heavy rainfall. Therefore, we should be ready for this, that we to continue, because all projections are more or less pointing to the fact that this may continue to the end of the century, if not beyond. In this regard, what is happening is that we are entering periods of high intensity rainfall concentrated over shorter periods of time than before, which means the intensity of the rainfall that is coming down is much more higher than what the land, the soils can absorb. And once it reaches its saturation point, it definitely has to release the water in form of flash flood. But these are not uncommon things. They are things that are happening. And I think what is important is to discuss why we are not taking necessary precautions to address these challenges.
What is the level of government preparedness for all of this? This happens year after year. Is the government helpless? Because we've seen stories around the world, like we saw recently in Pakistan, where large swaths of land were overtaken by floods for a long period of time, and are we prepared for this sort of thing?
The first challenge we will have globally is that what is happening recently are beyond expectations. Even if you look at that of Pakistan, the government had to come down and say clearly that it was beyond their expectation. But in the case of Nigeria, what we have, and what is still occurring in many parts of northern Nigeria, all the way from Jigawa to Benue State and all the rest, and not what we should be complaining about. There are things that we should harness and really use them for our benefit. I give an instance, for instance, in a state like Jigawa, where it does not rain for nearly 5 to 6 months of the year. Everybody knows, every person knows that in the northern part of Nigeria, nearly 50 to 60% of the rainfall of the year will occur in only 1 month of August. So are we prepared for that? The answer is, of course, no. And I can tell you, TVC are doing very well by always talking about these things. But in the next 1 or 2 months, in fact, if you look at Jigawa, it's already dry in many places now. In the next 1 or 2 months, everybody will just forget about it, and then until next year, it will come. Government is not really prepared at all levels, both at the national and the state. The federal government is making serious effort by having agencies like NIMED and the hydrological services that are giving us forecast. But forecast is not enough. If you tell people that it's going to flood, so what do you want them to do? There must be means by which the floods can be controlled and regulated in such a way that even though people will be affected, it should not be at this magnitude that we are talking about. And we have been advising government that what it requires is that Nigerian government at national and state level need to work together because we are dealing with systems. The rivers, the rains don't know any political boundaries. The rain doesn't know when it's leaving Lagos for Kano, doesn't know when it's leaving Jigawa for Bauchi or for Bayelsa. It's only moving as a system operated and governed by certain dynamics, which we will not be able to go into here. And once those dynamics drop this rain, they must find their level. In that regard, all the major river systems in this country must be treated like River Niger as a system, River Benue as a system, River Kaduna as a system, Cross River as a system, Ogun River as a system, in which it doesn't matter where they come from and where they're going, but they are managed integratedly, managed in a way and manner. For instance, look at what is happening in the Benue now. It is because the Cameroon people had to release some water from their dam so that it doesn't burst. And once that water is released, it comes straight down to the Benue Valley, to Yola, Makodi, and come down to Lokoja. So how do you deal with it? You have to deal with it as a system, not as a state-by-state attempt.
All right, Prof, we need to quickly go on a break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We've been looking at flooding in Nigeria, and we have a climate change consultant, Professor Emmanuel Oladapo, who have been speaking with us. Before we went on the break, Kemi, you wanted to ask a question.
Right, Prof. So, in addition to all you have said, let's also have your thoughts on the excess waters coming in from Cameroon, which has also affected some states in Nigeria. We understand that a dam, the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon, was open, and this has also, trickled in vast proportions into Nigeria. Talking about commitment of government, state government, federal government, now we are seeing, international angle to this. What's your take on that?
Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to drive at. The water from the Cameroon is the main source of River Benue. So, and it is on a higher level, which means it receives a lot more rainfall than ever before, than the other part of Nigeria. This dam, we know it exists. We have a good idea, and I believe there's a lot of interconnectivity among the agencies in the country. So the first thing, therefore, is that we know there will be water released every year based on their total amount available. And one of the things that government had tried to do, which I thought was going to check the thing a bit, was to develop the Casablanca dam, which is generating some power for Nigeria as well. But it now appears that that dam may not have enough capacity to contain the water that rushes, because the water comes from very high land and straight to the lowland part of Benue, Yola, Adamawa, and all the rest. So what that means is that there needs to be more in cooperation between the two governments, national governments, to develop a more encompassing strategy that will now enable this this water that comes from the dam, not to be doing the damage it's doing every year. And we have examples all over the world. The Mississippi River and all the rest were treated among states. So one of the things that I think is very clear, if the dam that has been constructed is not enough, the one that generated power, there's nothing that prevents more dams down the downstream, in which there will be smaller dams along the way that can be used to store water for people to have drinking water, for people to have irrigated water. And then as they leave Adamawa to Benue, to Kogi, they are creating more and more small dams along the valley to retain some of the excess water that be coming from other areas in such a way that it will be easier to manage. Two, the government of Nigeria must recognize that, that water that comes from that Cameroonian side will be bringing a lot of sediment because it's coming from a very high, fast-moving area because of the height. And it will be carrying a lot of materials. So it will be depositing a lot of sand as soon as it gets to the floodplain of Nigeria, in the Adamawa and Benue and Kogi. So, which means there must be consistent dredging of this water so that the channels cannot be filled up to allow the water to spread. If you have been to Makodi, anytime you drive around Makodi, you know that a lot of this water had been flowing before in some of these areas. The second thing that the government needs to do is that we need to go back to history. Maybe we have to do a sort of GIS mapping to know why did this river shift. When you look at river from the geographical point of view of those, rivers have a way of moving from side to side and bending, meanders, and all the rest we call them. Maybe some of these old channels have been filled up, and the river is trying to recover some channels. So we need to do all this mapping and know exactly where these things were about 50 years ago, 25 years ago, 10 years ago, to know whether we can really be using some of these floodplains where we were using it. We are assuming a lot of things in Nigeria. A lot of these floodplains became relatively drier in the 1970s and 1980s when the rainfall conditions were below normal. And people settled on them because they become very fertile agricultural lands. Now that the rains are returning more or less to the pre-1960 level and not the rest, then it is possible that this type of thing that is happening in Benue, Adamawa, and Jigawa will continue to be. And all we need is therefore to sit down, government of Nigeria, the states must work together, have a national technical committee to do a comprehensive mapping and vulnerability assessment of the major floodplains of Nigeria to determine how to utilize them for making water available for people to drink, for irrigation, agriculture, and all the rest. It is a shame that in this country we are complaining about floods. No city in this country can boast of water supply for 24 hours for up to 20% of their population. So why are we complaining? Can't we have methodologies and technologies and technical mentality to tap this water, to use them for our use, for providing water, for drinking water for people, for making it available for agricultural use? So it is just a question of not taking things seriously. My own advice is that, I think we are getting to a point now that maybe the civil society, the people of Nigeria, we have to start forming what we call like the green parties in Europe.
All right.
That campaigning, campaigns about these things during these elections about the environment. You don't hear anything about the environment. So, and without the environment, there's no economic development that we can have that will sustain us. Everything, look at what is happening in Jigawa. Everything, more or less, half of their farmlands are completely washed away. How do you want to recover the farmers? Because they don't get another rain next year. So it must be part of our development. It must be part of our dialogue on daily basis, but not only by the leaders, but by the people to know exactly that we have a problem that we must address squarely and in a more comprehensive and integrated manner.
Perhaps this is why some persons are calling for a national policy framework to addressing this matter. And stemming from what you have said, it shows that perhaps we do not have data with regards to what we see going on in the country in the past decades that we can use to address the issue of flooding. Now, as at 2012, when we had a major flooding in Nigeria, we were told that the total losses was pegged at $16.9 billion US. That goes to show how much was lost economically. Now, what are we looking at? If we are not addressing this as we should, what are we looking at in terms of losses? What are you pegging it as if government is not taking action as quickly as it should?
Well, I'm not too sure how to answer this anymore because what are we looking at in Nigeria generally in our development? The problem of this country is not that we don't have policy framework. We have a national water policy that has been revised severally. And I think the latest one is coming up, but was approved about 2 years ago. There's another one trying to have a national water bill that is creating some confusion. The challenge of Nigeria is not having policies and development frameworks. The problem is not implementing them. When we have these policies, we keep on launching. Federal Executive Council will approve. But you will never see any of the things in that policy being translated to practical activities budgeted for. And I think this is the challenge, both at the federal and the state level. You wonder what are these national annual budgets for? You will not see things that are really going to help to make these things to work. So it's not the question that there's no policy framework. It's the question of there's no implementation. In this year alone, the one of 2012 you mentioned, for Nigerians to understand it very well, because when you talk about dollars, many people don't understand. It was estimated to be over 2.16 trillion naira, that was lost in terms of properties and everything. I'm yet to see what will happen this year, but we may exceed that one because most of the areas which were being affected, they were not as properly developed in 2012 as they are today. So the amount of damages, apart from the human losses too, will maybe even be higher than that of 2012. So it calls for a really concerted effort. Make it a national route. Let the Ministry of Water Resources move, play a lead role. Bring all the state ministries together, bring all the local government institutions together, and come out with a comprehensive approach that will be supported budget-wise, including looking for support from development partners to implement. Otherwise, after this month, when the rains will reduce in all over the country, by now many parts of northern Nigeria won't get any rain again. So nobody is talking about it. Even look at the map of, look at Jigawa, the places where people thought was very bad 2 weeks ago, it's already dry. And people are already moving. And that's how we forget about it until it comes again. But the events that are happening around us, we will not forget. The rains will still come next year. The rains will still rain the way it's raining. It will be heavy June, July in the south, and extremely heavy in the north in December when it breaks in the south. So we should, God has given us every sign. There's no magic. We already know. What we don't know is what is the amount and how many days will it come. But we should prepare ourselves. Let's prepare ourselves. That is like you have a lot of things in your house and you tell your security to come only Monday and Wednesday and you leave the other days here. No, we cannot do that. This thing is something that we know will happen and we must be ready every time and plan towards it. What is happening in some places is that the extreme events, like what happened in Britain, the drought in Britain has what you call a 1 year in 500 years return. That is, it occurs once in 500 years. If you plan with such a figure in mind, it means you are really helping your system to operate with the probability of 1 out of 500 of exceeding what you are planning for. So we must plan with a lot of these extreme events in mind, not just do it 1 year and forget it, because nature does not operate in isolation that way.
All right, we have to leave the conversation here now, but we must thank you, climate change consultant, Professor Emmanuel Oladapo, for your time on the program.
Thank you very much. I wish you well. Let Nigerians continue to discuss these issues. Government.
All right.